Hello, it's Robert Kiyosaki, and this is another in the series of Capitalist Manifesto. It's my latest book. It'll be launched November 10th on the Marine Corps birthday. And setting up for the program, we have a series of interviews of people who actually ran from communism, like from Cuba and things like this. But I have a very special friend, a guest, congressman, and Jack and I are U.S. Marines, and we didn't run from communism. We killed communists. I know that sounds terrible, but that's what U.S. Marines do. And so Jack and I were roommates on board the SS Okinawa, and it was a composite, as a carrier, it was a composite squadron. There were three types of aircraft: the H-1, the CH-46, and the CH-53. It was an interesting time because very few squadrons were composite squadrons. Most squadrons are individual squadrons. So I was a gunship pilot, Jack was a 46 pilot, and then you had the Jolly Green pilots. So Jack, and then by the way, Jack and I both started off as lieutenants, and I got booted out as a lieutenant. I had disciplinary problems. And Jack went on to become a lieutenant general. And that's almost impossible. To make general is impossible. To be a 3-star general, even more impossible. But Jack continues to fight. He's now in Congress where the real communist battle is taking place. So Jack, as a congressman from Michigan, welcome and thank you for the years of friendship, and good to see you again, my friend.
You know, Robert, thank you so very much, not only for your friendship, but continuing the discussions that we started having 50 years ago.
Right.
And as roommates aboard the USS Okinawa, we used to debate and argue our points of view very heavily. And we still today provide the example for the next generations that you can argue, debate, but still be, the best of friends, laugh, love, but move the ball forward away from socialism.
Yeah, and we keep the fight.
Absolutely.
It's like, I never thought we'd be fighting communism in America, but that's what we're continuing to do today. I mean, it's just disgusting. So Jack, I have a quick question. I was a lieutenant and you're a lieutenant. What did it take to make Lieutenant General 3 stars?
Number one, a lot of luck. Number two, always what I say, you lead down, but manage up. In other words, those Marines under your command, you lead them by example. You lead, you take care of them. And when you manage up, there's always the hierarchy above you. Don't kiss up, manage up. And enable the people above you to do better, because the fact that you enable them through your own subtle ways.
And so the reason Jack says that, because we had a composite squadron. Most squadrons are like one aircraft type, but we all got together to go on this carrier, 3 different aircraft, 3 different personalities of pilots, right? We're all different personalities. And all this. And so Jack would sit there, and the Huey gunship pilots were the rabble rousers. I mean, we laughed at everything and all this. But Jack always managed up. But the Huey pilots would sit there and go, oh, he's kissing that guy's ass, And Jack would stand there with that same smile. And anyway, it was an interesting time, wasn't it?
Well, what I'm looking at right now over my screen that is in front of me is the picture of when we formed up in Okinawa to go. And I'm looking at you and I'm looking at me, and I can see, on the right side is the Huey with the little Spanish fly on the front, and on the left is the 46. You can just see the tail rotor of the 53. But as we look at all the Marines who are in our unit, I mean, boy, did we have a good time. Did we have a good group? And again, we didn't run from anything. We ran to the sound of the guns.
Right. And what it was like was I call it feet dry. You know, we were about 25 miles out at sea and the aircraft would fly. I remember tagging along with Jack because Jack was in the 46. And the Huey pilots always gave the 46 pilots a lot of grief because we said we got to stay away from the 46 because it always broke in half. and so there's 46s, those twin rotors going like this, and they broke in half in the middle of the sky. So, so the Huey pilots said, well, we'll stay away from those guys because they're going to die anyway. It was station 410. Ding, ding, 410 departing, and it came in half, but we still flew.
That we had to get the airplane fixed. We figured out that was a problem with a castle nut on the rear rotor that was coming apart. We lost 3 crews. We didn't. Our squadron, 165, lost the 3 crews at the same time. Nothing those pilots or crews could have been done. The aircraft fell apart. And
we kept flying.
Yeah.
And I had 2 friends never come back. They were A6 pilots, and I used to say to him, he was my classmate since I was 10 years old, Robbie Peacock, and the A6 was a flying coffin because it came in so low level. The point is, we kept flying. Why did we keep flying, even though we're going to die anyway?
Yeah, that's easy. We had a mission to accomplish. We were supporting at that point primarily the South Vietnamese Marines, who had been tasked with basically, as you articulate very well in the book, taking back Quang Tri, taking back that northern area to include, Quang Tri was gone. We still had Way, but working our way back up to the DMZ. I mean, that was our mission. We were supporting others.
And there's one more story I'd like to have you tell is that that was when technology changed. You know what happened is that we spent millions training one pilot and millions training a crew. So that in my aircraft, there was 2 pilots, 2 gunners, and a crew chief. $1 million aircraft. And up until then, we had to come in at 1,500 feet because the Viet Cong and NVA were firing the AK-47 at us. But then technology came in, and there was this thing called the SA-7. It was a handheld heat-seeking rocket. And as I write about in the book, is that all of a sudden we had to change. We couldn't come in at 1,500 anymore. We had to come in at treetop level. It was called defilade. So if you can imagine, you're up here, you can see each other. But when we had to come into the battle at this level at treetop, we couldn't see each other. We're so tight and close and all this. So, and it took nothing to train that Viet Cong to shoot that rocket. No training. Probably cost $1,000. They just pulled the trigger and that rocket came right up our tailpipes. And it changed everything. So Jack and I were there when technology took over skill. So a little Viet Cong, it could be a man or woman, just point and shoot, it just came up our tailpipes.
Yeah.
So what happened that day?
In your book, you talk about the intelligence officer who stood up in the briefing and said, it's changed, warfare's changed. Do you remember who the intelligence officer was given the briefing?
Was you?
It was me. I was the S2 in the squadron.
Oh, okay.
But it had, because that SA-7, it took 46 seconds target acquisition, and that's why we had to stay low so the trees and the buildings could break up our profile.
So what happened that day going to Quang Tri?
Well, first of all, we landed in the wrong zone because the scout birds taking us in got a little disoriented. It turned out it was a regimental command post for the NVA. And that's when, again, we got the 346s that went down. But when the 53 got hit, we had just loaded up, or unloaded, if you will, the last section of 46s. And we saw the fire of the missile fire, and we saw the implosion or explosion, whatever you want to call it, into the left engine of the 53 as it went down. And again, you articulated it in the book exactly. As I was reading it, it was exactly as it happened back on July 11th, 1972.
And why did that guy, I forget his name now, I can see his face, but the 53 floated?
Yeah,
We're
don't
all
know. I
low.
think, well, first of all, they had a sling load of ammunition, a crate underneath. They had 62 Vietnamese Marines in there roughly, but they had an external load of ammo that they were all carrying in. So he had to pop up a little bit so he didn't catch that sling load on the treetops. So when he popped up to slow down to make the descent into the zone is when they hit him. So he was just literally a sitting duck at the perfect place. And the co-pilot, who was a second tour guy, and I don't remember his name. I mean, I can remember seeing him. He was flying it with his head out the left window because of the smoke was coming out of the cockpit. And he literally flew it into a controlled landing, a crash landing in there into the zone. If it wouldn't have been for him, he maintained his cool and got it safely onto the ground, even though because of the implosion in the back, all of those South Vietnamese Marines and a lot of our crew in the back, it was too late for them.
So how has that affected? I mean, I still remember it. I don't really know how it affects me. You know, there were times of immense sadness, if you know what I mean. There's a sadness that is indescribable.
There is, you know, we are, those of us who choose the combat arms or just the coat of arms, if you will, to defend our country, we share a special bond that even though they, you know, good people who don't serve, they just haven't been through that bonding through stress that we've been through. And in that, when you lose someone or something bad happens, there is that sadness that goes on over time. But the real sadness was, which kind of, I'm not going to say it turned to anger for me, but again, you articulate in your book, some of the same people that were, shall we say, spitting on me and on you and, you know, denigrating us when we came back from Vietnam. By the way, I ran into them again about 4 years ago, shortly after I got elected. They were doing the same thing to me 50 years later, and I called them out on it.
They're still spitting on you?
Yeah, so instead of being 50 Shades of Gray, this is 50 Shades of Jerks 50 years later.
So, you know, it was a guy named Stalin. I went to, you know, military school, and there was this guy Stalin, and everybody knew he was as bad, if not worse, than Hitler. And they sent this general, his name was Patton, and Patton wanted to stop him. Patton wanted to stop Stalin in Berlin.
Oh, yes, he did.
He did. But the difference is, you see, Jack became a general, a lieutenant general, and I'm still a lieutenant. Disciplinary problems. But we still fought and all this. But what Patton said, the reason Patton was so well loved was Patton fought from the front. And the other generals fought from the back. And what happened is, because he basically, you know, Patton said that Eisenhower and FDR were more concerned about politics than fighting. And he said, plus Stalin had like 55 million, you know, Russians behind of him, and they didn't want a prolonged war. And so my point of view is, because they pulled Patton back, communism kept spreading. Stalin never stopped. It was replaced by Khrushchev and all these guys and all that. What do you say about that as a 3-star general? That's another whole level of leadership in the field, a general who fights from the front and generals who fight from the back. And then you had this guy like Patton fighting Stalin. And we're now fighting Stalin today in America.
Well, we are. And anybody worth their salt anywhere, whether it's in the military or any business, if you don't lead from the front, you're obviously not being the example that those under your command, under your tutelage, under your care, under your education system, be the example that you want others to be. And we started decades ago in the Marine Corps calling some of those senior officials bunker bunnies, because they were very safe in the bunker. But the bottom line is, they never really got out there and saw how hot the lead could get after a certain point in their career. Not saying that's good or bad, it just is what it is. But when you think about using Stalin and Patton as an example, because Patton, he didn't want to slow down. He wanted to go take care of things in Berlin and keep marching right through. At that time, the diplomacy in the United States, I believe, they were tired. America was tired after, several years of war, after the Depression. I think the Marshall Plan that came out of that, it was a negotiated middle ground. We can always go back in hindsight. But the point is, let's face it, what did Stalin do that Lenin didn't do? Lenin tried to take Marx's theories and put them into practice with the Bolshevik Revolution. Well, it didn't work. So Stalin just looked at it and said, I think I'll just kill everybody. That's what he did. And that's what Mao did. And that's what Castro's done. That's what Pol Pot did. That's what, start naming your dictators, your communist dictators. I mean, that's how it works. So anybody who says communism and socialism are not tied has not studied history.
My aunt was a prima ballerina of Paris, and she fought for the French resistance. And so she would go and drink with the Russians to gain information. And then I went to school in New York, and she lived in New York on the Upper East Side. And she told me, she says, Patton was the guy. Patton had the plan, but politics got in the way. She says people respected Patton because he was going to take them all the way back. And she said to me, she said, if Patton had stopped Stalin, there'd be probably 100 million people still alive today. Because socialism and communism, they've killed more people than capitalism has. Any comments on that?
Yeah. Well, no, it is exactly correct. And what we're short on today, I'm not going to speak for the world. I'll just speak for the United States of America, our country, not this country, our country, own it, is that we haven't studied history. You and I can sit here and talk again 50 years later because we had the benefit of a school system that taught us history, that challenged us both factually and intellectually and philosophically and all of that. Our education system today is, I'm not even going to say it's underperforming. It's just flat unsatisfactory when it comes to preparing our young boys and girls in the history of our country in such a way that they can become good functioning adults.
Well, they've changed history. Our school teachers are Marxists right now, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm going to say this. So Patton should have stopped Stalin. He didn't let him stop him. Oh, you know what he said? I was reading this quote by Patton. He says, oh my God, he says, the Marines are fighting in the Pacific. I hope they don't get all the credit. He wanted to go, Patton wanted to go kick ass at the Japanese because he was afraid the Marines would get all the credit. He was such a fighter. And we don't have that today. But anyway, so if Patton Patton did not stop Stalin, and so the reason I'm going to talk to you today is, where were you on January 6, 2021, when communism tried to take over the capital of the United States?
I was right in the chamber of the House, observing the whole thing, part of the whole event. And number one, I watched as the Capitol Police did what they were trained to do inside the chamber, which is basically, if you were a member inside the chamber, get everybody out of there, keep you safe, and then do whatever needed to be done outside the chamber. But what you're seeing, so I experienced the whole thing from the inside. I had observed some of the goings on as I walked from my office to the chamber that day before coming in, and I could see the barricades, which had been around the Capitol for a little bit. I could see a few of the police. But my thought was, just as not thinking about what might happen next, I went, this certainly wouldn't be a tough perimeter to breach. I mean, not at all. And I guess what I see is the failure, absolutely total failure of leadership. And by the way, the top of the leadership pyramid for accountability and responsibility is whoever is Speaker of the House. All blame or all credit lies with them and no one else. If that would have been a military situation, the Speaker of the House and down the line should have been relieved, but they only relieved the Sergeant at Arms, the Chief of Capitol Police. That, unfortunately, because of the politicization of this January 6th commission, whatever they're calling it, select committee, we're not going to see the real truth because of the fact that the Speaker has politicized it to cover her own backside.
Amen. Jack, I thank you for the years of friendship. It was, I think God put you and I together in that little room, and we'd sit there and debate this for hours, and the fight goes on. You fight from out there, I fight from here, but semper fidelis, my friend. I'm honored to be your friend.
Semper fidelis. I can't wait to see you again so we can hoist one in honor of the Marine Corps birthday on November 10th. Congratulations.
Right. Thank you, Jack. Bless you.
Thanks, Robert. Bless you too, my friend.